"Don't you dare touch that bottle, Walter," I said, my voice coming out sharper and colder than the morning air. Walter Johnson froze his hand, hovering just an inch above the gleaming green bottle sitting in the center of my kitchen table. He looked at me, his cheerful face clouding with confusion. At 72, Walter's expressions were as open and honest as they were when we were boys. He had been my best friend for nearly 50 years, and the brother I never had. I had never spoken to him like that before. He slowly pulled his hand back as if the bottle were hot. "Easy there, Sam," he chuckled, though his eyes were serious. I was just admiring it. "That's a top-shelf whiskey. Must have set someone back a pretty penny." A birthday gift I couldn't answer right away. I just stared at the bottle. It sat there on the polished oak of the table, catching the morning light and looking for all the world like a jewel. But to me it felt like a snake coiled in the sun, a beautiful, deadly thing that had no place in my home. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh coffee doing little to calm the tremor in my hands. Something like that, I finally managed to say, my voice now quiet and strained. Just 3 hours earlier, that bottle hadn't been in my house. My 70th birthday had started like any other day. The silence of the house was the first thing I noticed, as it was every morning since my dear Lena passed. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. It was a delivery driver, a young kid with headphones around his neck holding a plain cardboard box. He mumbled a quick happy birthday after checking my ID, then hurried back to his truck. There was no sender's name on the package, just my address, and a few words scrawled on top in a familiar, sharp handwriting, "Happy birthday." My heart seized in my chest. I knew that handwriting better than my own. It was Jamal's, my son, my only child who hadn't spoken a word to me in 3 years, not since the day he stood in this very kitchen and accused me of giving up on his mother. Not since he packed a bag and walked out, leaving a hole in my life that no amount of time could ever fill. I carried the box inside and set it on the table with trembling hands. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe this was it, an olive branch, a first step towards healing the terrible wound between us. I carefully cut the tape and opened the box. Nestled inside was the bottle of Irish whiskey, limited edition, 18 years old. The kind of thing we used to toast with on special occasions back when our family was whole. And that's when the hope died, replaced by a cold, bitter certainty. Jamal knew. Of course he knew. He was there in the hospital waiting room when the doctor told me, his face grim. "Your heart can't take it anymore, Sam. Not one more drop. Do you understand me?" I had nodded, my world tilting on its axis. Giving up whiskey was a small price to pay for a few more years, a few more memories. But Jamal had been there. He knew. So what was this bottle? A thoughtless mistake from a son so disconnected he'd forgotten a life-altering detail about his own father? Or was it something else? A deliberate cruelty, a twisted reminder of everything I had lost, a toast to a life I could no longer live. The bottle was not an olive branch, it was a slap in the face. I left it on the table, unable to touch it, unable to throw it away, a monument to my son's resentment. So when Walter had walked in an hour later, his face split by a wide grin and a bottle of cheap champagne in his hand for a birthday toast, all I saw was that venomous green bottle sitting between us. He had whistled when he saw it, his eyes lighting up. Well, now Samuel, he had boomed. Looks like someone beat me to it, and with a much bigger budget. And he had reached for it with the innocent admiration of a true friend. That brought me back to the present moment. I finally met Walter's concerned gaze. "I'm sorry, Walt," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to snap." He waved it off. "Don't you worry about it." "But something's wrong, Sam. I can see it. What is it about that bottle?" I sank into the chair opposite him. "It's from Jamal," I said quietly. Walter's smile vanished. He knew our story. He had been there through it all. He sat down, his expression full of sympathy. We sat in silence for a long moment, the bottle gleaming between us. I couldn't keep it. Every time I looked at it, I would see my son's angry face, hear his cruel words. But throwing away something so expensive felt like a waste. Then an idea came to me, a simple solution. "Walter." I began pushing the bottle gently across the table towards him. "I want you to have it." He looked startled. "Sam, I couldn't. This is from your boy. He and I both know I can't drink it," I insisted. "It's just a painful reminder sitting here. Please, take it, enjoy it, celebrate with it." It would make me genuinely happy to know it brought some joy to my best friend instead of just sitting here bringing me pain. Walter hesitated for another moment, searching my face. He saw the sincerity there. A slow smile spread across his lips. Well, he said, his good cheer returning. If you're sure, it would be a shame to let a masterpiece like this go to waste. He picked up the bottle, his hands cradling it like a treasure. Thank you, Sam. Truly. Happy birthday, my friend. He left a few minutes later, the bottle tucked securely under his arm. As I watched him go, I felt a wave of relief. The poison was out of my house. But a small, cold knot of unease remained in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. That evening, the house felt cavernously empty. The relief I had felt when Walter left with the bottle had slowly curdled into a familiar loneliness. I was washing my dinner plate when the phone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet. I dried my hands and glanced at the caller ID. My heart stopped. It was Jamal. For 3 years, that screen had remained dark with his name. I hesitated, a war of anger and a desperate fatherly hope raging inside me. I answered, my voice a dry croak. Hello, Dad. His voice was flat, distant. Just calling to say happy birthday. The words were so simple, so normal, yet they felt rehearsed and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a stranger reading a script. Thank you, Jamal, I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. It's good to hear from you. Yeah, well, did you get my gift? He asked, a feigned casualness in his tone that set my teeth on edge. I decided to be honest. Maybe honesty was the bridge we needed. I did. It was a beautiful bottle, son. Very generous. I paused, then added gently, You know I can't drink anymore, Jamal. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Right, he said, the word clipped. I guess I forgot. He was a terrible liar. He had never forgotten anything in his life. But I let it go. It didn't go to waste. I continued trying to fill the awkward silence. My friend Walter Johnson came by earlier. You remember your father-in-law. I gave the bottle to him. He was thrilled. The silence that followed this time was different. It was not awkward. It was heavy, charged like the air before a lightning strike. When Jamal spoke again, his voice was completely transformed. The fake casualness was gone, replaced by a sharp, urgent tension. What he snapped. What did you say? I was taken aback. I said I gave it to Walter. He's a good man, he'll appreciate. You gave him the whole bottle, Jamal interrupted, his words tumbling out now fast and sharp. The entire thing. Is he at your house? Did he open it? No, he took it home with him, I said. My own confusion starting to curdle into alarm. Why? What's wrong? Did he drink any? Jamal pressed, his voice strained, almost frantic. Dad, did you see him drink any of it? I don't know, son. He just left a few hours ago. Jamal, what is this about? I demanded, my hand gripping the phone tightly. A cold dread was beginning to spread through my chest. This was not the call of a son trying to reconnect. This was something else entirely. Nothing he said, his voice suddenly guarded again. Never mind. I have to go. And then he hung up. I stood there in the silent kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had left me deeply unsettled. His frantic questions about Walter, his sudden panic, it made no sense. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just Jamal being strange, that our broken relationship made every interaction feel like a minefield. But as I went to bed that night, I could not shake the feeling that I had missed something terribly important. The next morning, the phone rang again. It was just after 8. I saw the name Maria Johnson on the screen, Walter's daughter. I smiled, thinking she was calling to pass on Walter's thanks for the whiskey. I answered cheerfully. Good morning, Maria? Her reply was a choked sob. Sam, she cried, her voice torn apart by panic and grief. It's Dad. It's my father. My blood ran cold. Maria, slow down. What happened? We found him this morning, she gasped between sobs. On the kitchen floor. He wasn't breathing right. The ambulance just took him to St. Mary's. They don't know what's wrong. They said it looks like a massive heart attack, but his vitals are all wrong. They're confused. Oh God, Sam, he's in critical condition. The world tilted. My hand went to the wall to steady myself. Maria's words continued, but they sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. My mind was no longer in my kitchen. It was replaying the phone call from the night before. Jamal's voice sharp with an inexplicable panic. You gave him the whole bottle. Did he drink any? The two events, the phone call and the collapse, slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. A horrifying, sickening picture began to form. It couldn't be. It was impossible. It was monstrous. But the pieces fit. The gift I couldn't drink. The son who knew I couldn't drink it. The frantic questions not about my health, but about whether someone else had consumed his gift. And now that someone else, my best friend, was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. It was not a coincidence. This was not a tragic accident. I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone slipping from my numb fingers and clattering to the floor. An icy certainty settled over me, so cold and heavy, it felt like a block of ice forming in my soul. I knew with a clarity that terrified me that the bottle of whiskey was the reason Walter was dying. And I knew my son had sent it. For a few paralyzing moments, I could do nothing but sit there, the weight of my realization pinning me to the chair. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a mundane sound in a world that had suddenly become a nightmare. Then something inside me broke free. It was the part of me that had coached kids, the part that had raised a son, the part that had loved a wife through sickness and health. It was the part of me that did not break. I pushed myself up from the table, my movement stiff but deliberate. I had a purpose. I had to know for sure. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I drove to the hospital on autopilot, the familiar streets of our town looking alien and menacing. The hospital was a maze of sterile white hallways and the quiet, urgent squeak of rubber-soled shoes. I found the intensive care unit and saw Maria Johnson through the glass, her face pale and streaked with tears as she spoke to a doctor. She looked up and saw me, her expression crumbling further. She came out into the hallway and I wrapped my arms around her as she sobbed. "They still don't know," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "His heart is failing, his muscles are weak. It's like his body is just shutting down. They're running every test they can think of." I couldn't bring myself to tell her my suspicion. How could I plant such a monstrous idea in her head when I had no proof? It would be a cruelty beyond measure. I stayed for an hour, offering what little comfort I could. My own heart, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I couldn't see Walter. He was behind a closed door, surrounded by machines that were fighting a battle against an enemy the doctors didn't even know existed. Seeing that closed door, knowing my best friend was behind it, ignited a fire in me. I could not just wait. I had to act. I left the hospital and drove straight to Walter's house. Maria had given me a spare key years ago. Letting myself in felt like a violation, but it was a necessary one. The house was just as Walter had left it. A newspaper lay open on his favorite armchair. A coffee cup sat on the end table. And there on the kitchen counter was the bottle. My breath caught in my throat. It was open. Beside it sat a single heavy-bottomed glass, the kind Walter used for special occasions. It was empty, but a faint amber residue clung to the bottom. He had only had one glass. Thank God. Maybe that one glass was little enough that he could survive. My hands were surprisingly steady as I went through his cupboards, found a small empty medicine bottle and carefully poured a sample of the whiskey into it. The liquid glugged out thick and syrupy. I sealed the lid tightly, wiping the outside clean before slipping it into my pocket. It felt like a radioactive object pulsing with a terrible energy. There was only one person I could trust with this. David Carter had been my friend even longer than Walter. He'd been the best veterinarian in the state for 40 years before retiring, but his passion for science had never faded. He maintained a small, sophisticated laboratory in his basement, a hobby that kept his sharp mind busy. I drove to his house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. He opened the door, his face breaking into a warm smile that faltered when he saw my expression. "Sam, what on earth is wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse, David," I said, my voice gravelly. "I think I'm about to see one." I followed him down to his lab in the basement. It was a world of gleaming steel beakers and humming machines. The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. I placed the small bottle on his workbench and told him everything. I told him about my birthday, the package from Jamal, the strange phone call, and Walter's sudden collapse in the hospital. I watched his face shift from friendly concern to focused intensity, then to grim understanding. He picked up the bottle, his experienced eyes examining the contents. He didn't question me. He didn't tell me I was crazy. He simply listened. When I finished, he looked at me, his gaze steady and serious. "Leave this with me, Sam," he said. "I'll run a full analysis. Gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. If there's anything in here that isn't supposed to be, I'll find it. Go home. Try to rest. I'll call you the second I know anything." The drive home was the longest of my life. Resting was impossible. I paced the floors of my empty house, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of my own heart. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer blow. I saw Jamal's face everywhere, as a baby taking his first steps, as a boy proudly holding up his first fish, as a young man graduating from college. How could that boy become the man who would do this? The love I felt for him was a physical ache, a deep foundational part of me. But now it was tangled with a horror so profound, it threatened to suffocate me. 3 hours later, my phone rang. I snatched it up before the first ring had finished. David Sam. His voice was low, devoid of its usual warmth. It was the voice of a doctor about to deliver the worst possible news. "I have the results." I held my breath. "It's not just whiskey, Sam," he said, his voice tight with a controlled anger I had never heard from him before. "It's been contaminated, laced with a significant concentration of a trematone alkaloid." The scientific name meant nothing to me. David talked to me in English. "What is it?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "The common name for the source of this poison, Sam, is white snake root. It's a plant. It causes what they used to call milk sickness. It creates severe muscular weakness, vomiting, and ultimately congestive heart failure. The dosage in this sample is incredibly high. A single glass would be more than enough to induce a cardiac event in a healthy man. For someone like Walter with his history, Sam, he is incredibly lucky to be alive." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I collapsed into a chair, the phone still pressed to my ear, but I could no longer hear anything. White snake root. Poison. My son had sent me poison for my birthday, and my best friend had drunk it. The last desperate shred of hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, a paranoid fantasy of a lonely old man, was gone. It was replaced by a truth so cold and so sharp that it felt like a shard of ice being driven straight through my heart. The truth, when it finally arrived, was not a cleansing fire. It was a block of ice that settled deep in my gut, freezing everything it touched. My son, my own flesh and blood, had tried to kill me, and in his careless evil he had nearly killed my best friend. The grief was so immense, so profound, it threatened to swallow me whole. But beneath the grief, a different feeling began to take root. It was a cold, hard resolve. I had spent my life building things, fixing things, raising a family. I would not let my son's darkness be the final chapter of my story or of Walter's. I knew I had to face him, but I also knew Jamal. He was a snake, all smooth surfaces and hidden fangs. He would lie, twist, and manipulate his way out of anything. Going to him with just my word, just my grief, would be useless. I needed more. I needed his own words. The next morning, I drove to a small electronics store downtown. I bought the smallest, most powerful digital audio recorder I could find. It was no bigger than my thumb, a tiny piece of black plastic that felt impossibly heavy in my hand. It was my secret weapon, my silent witness. As I sat in my car practicing how to turn it on and off without looking, a wave of despair washed over me. What kind of father has to prepare for a conversation with his son like he's a spy going behind enemy lines? I pushed the feeling down. The man I was going to see was not the boy I had raised. That boy was gone. This man was a stranger, and I had to treat him as such. The drive to Jamal's neighborhood was a journey into a different world. My quiet street of modest, well-kept homes gave way to winding roads and sprawling modern houses that sat on manicured lawns like sterile monuments to wealth. His house was the largest of them all, a fortress of glass and gray stone with a perfectly landscaped yard that showed no signs of life. It was a cold, beautiful prison. I parked on the street and walked up the long stone walkway, the tiny recorder nestled in my shirt pocket, its single button, a small hard point of pressure against my chest. I pressed the doorbell, and after a long moment the door opened. It was Simone Jamal's wife. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me. She was a ghost in her own home, thin and pale, with a nervous energy that seemed to radiate from her. "Sam," she whispered, glancing nervously back into the house. "What are you doing here, Jamal? I know he's home, Simone," I said gently. "I need to speak with him." She wrung her hands, her gaze darting everywhere but at my face. "It's not a good time. It's important," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. She flinched, then nodded silently and stepped aside to let me in. The inside of the house was just like the outside, cold, cavernous, and impersonal. The furniture was sleek and uncomfortable looking. The art on the walls was abstract and meaningless to me. It felt less like a home and more like the lobby of an expensive hotel. Jamal appeared at the top of a floating staircase, a tablet in his hand. He was dressed in expensive, casual clothes, looking relaxed and in control. He showed no surprise at seeing me. "Dad," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone as he descended the stairs. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I waited until he was standing in front of me on the cold marble floor. I clicked the button in my pocket. "I'm here about Walter," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the rage and pain that was screaming inside me. Jamal's face arranged itself into a mask of perfect concern. He even put a hand to his chest. "Walter. Oh my God, what happened?" Simone mentioned he was in the hospital. "Is he okay?" "No, Jamal, he's not okay," I said, watching his eyes. They were empty. There was no flicker of genuine emotion. "He's in intensive care. His heart is failing. The doctors are fighting to keep him alive." "That's horrible," Jamal said, shaking his head. "Just horrible." "The poor man. What happened?" "That's what I'm here to ask you," I said. "It happened after he drank the whiskey you sent me for my birthday." I watched him holding my breath, waiting for a crack in the facade. There was nothing. He just looked at me with a carefully crafted expression of confusion. "The whiskey." "Dad, what are you talking about? What does a gift have to do with Walter's health?" "You called me Jamal," I pressed on. "You were frantic. You wanted to know if Walter drank it." "Why?" He let out a small, condescending laugh. "I was frantic because I was worried about you, Dad. I suddenly remembered you weren't supposed to drink and I felt terrible. I was worried you might have had some and made yourself sick. Is that so hard to believe? It was a perfect, plausible lie. But I wasn't done. It was poison, Jamal." The words hung in the cold air between us. For the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt, not fear, annoyance. He was annoyed that I had found him out. But then the mask was back in place. He stepped closer, his voice soft and full of a sickening fake pity. "Dad," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "I think you need to sit down. You're not thinking clearly." I stood my ground, shrugging his hand off. "I am thinking clearer than I have in years." He sighed a long theatrical sound. "Dad, I know you've been under a lot of stress since Mom died, and Walter's situation is tragic, but you're starting to say things that don't make any sense. You're making accusations against your own son." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The doctors, they did mention there could be some confusion after your heart surgery, didn't they? That your memory might not be what it used to be." The audacity of it, the sheer cruelty, took my breath away. He was trying to gaslight me, to make me believe I was losing my mind. A hot white rage surged through me, so powerful I felt my hands clench into fists. I wanted to lash out to wipe the smug, pitying look off his face. But then I felt it. The small, hard outline of the recorder in my pocket, a silent witness. It reminded me of my purpose. I held his gaze, my face a mask of stone. He took my silence as a victory. He pressed his advantage. "You keep a lot of things in that garage of yours, Dad. Old cans of paint cleaners, chemicals for the garden. It's a mess in there. I've told you to clean it out." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Maybe you were working on something. Maybe you left a container open. It would be an easy mistake for someone your age to make. You could have, I don't know, contaminated the bottle by accident without even realizing it." He said it all with such earnest, feigned concern. He had twisted reality until I was the careless old man and he was the worried, logical son. It was the most evil thing I had ever witnessed. I had my answer. I had it all on a tiny digital file. There was nothing more to say. I turned and walked towards the door. "You should go home and get some rest, Dad," he called after me, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We can talk again when you're feeling more like yourself." I didn't look back. I walked out of that cold, sterile house and back into the sunlight, the recording a small, hard lump of truth in my pocket, ready to burn his world to the ground. The drive to the police station was fueled by a grim sense of purpose. The small digital recorder in my pocket was no longer just a tool for confirmation. It was now a weapon for justice. I clutched the lab report from David in my other hand, the paper crinkling in my tight grip. The words on the page, white snake root, were a death sentence Jamal had tried to write, and I was about to deliver it back to him. I asked for the detective in charge of major crimes and was led to a small, cluttered office where a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes looked up from her desk. Her nameplate read, Detective Isabella Rossi. She had a no-nonsense air about her, and I felt a small flicker of hope. She was not someone who would be easily fooled. I sat down, and in a low, steady voice, I laid out the entire story from the arrival of the package to the chilling conversation I'd had with my son. I placed the lab report on her desk first. She read it carefully, her expression unreadable, her professionalism a solid wall. When I was done, she looked at me with a practiced neutrality. Mr. Hayes, she said, her tone even, this is a very serious accusation to make against your own son. Family disputes can be complicated. I saw the skepticism in her eyes. She had likely seen dozens of bitter family feud stories twisted by anger and grief. I knew I needed more. I know how it sounds, Detective, I said, leaning forward. That's why I brought this. I took the small recorder from my pocket and placed it on the desk between us. This is my son Jamal explaining to me how I might be losing my mind, how I might have poisoned my best friend by accident. She raised an eyebrow but took the recorder. She attached a small speaker to it, and the sound of my conversation with Jamal filled the small office. She listened intently, her gaze fixed on the device. I watched her face as she heard Jamal's smooth, condescending tones, his feigned pity, his cruel, calculated suggestions that I was a confused old man. I saw the shift. The professional neutrality in her eyes slowly hardened into a focused, sharp-edged intensity. The wall was coming down. She heard the manipulation, the cold, clinical cruelty beneath the concerned words. When the recording finished, she was silent for a long moment. She looked from the recorder to the lab report, then finally at me. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a grim belief. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice now carrying a new weight. I am opening an official investigation into your son Jamal Hayes for attempted murder. We will need a formal statement. And please do not engage with him again. Let us handle it from here. I walked out of that police station feeling a profound sense of relief, but also a deep, gut-wrenching sorrow. I had just set in motion the events that would destroy my son's life, but I knew with absolute certainty that he had left me no other choice. For a few days, an unnerving quiet settled over my life. I visited the hospital where Walter was showing the slightest signs of improvement. The doctors were still baffled, but cautiously optimistic. I spent my evenings reading, trying to lose myself in other people's stories. I began to hope that Jamal, knowing he was a suspect, would simply lay low. It was a foolish hope. I came home one afternoon from a grocery run. As I walked around to the back of the house, I noticed the kitchen door was not fully closed. It was ajar by just an inch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I never left that door unlocked, let alone open. I pushed it open slowly, my ears straining for any sound. The house was silent. Nothing seemed out of place. The television was off. The mail was still on the counter where I'd left it. I walked through the downstairs, my senses on high alert, checking every room. Nothing was missing. My wallet was on the dresser. My laptop was on my desk. Relief began to wash over me. Maybe I had just been careless. Maybe in my distracted state I had forgotten to lock it. Then I walked back into the living room and I saw it. On the small table beside my armchair sat a framed photograph of my late wife, Lena. It was my favorite picture of her, her smile so full of life it could still make my heart ache. I looked at that picture every single day, but now it was turned face down on the table. The breath left my body in a rush. This was not carelessness. This was a message. Jamal had been here. He had walked through my home, my private sanctuary, and had left his mark. He hadn't taken anything of value because he wanted me to know this wasn't a robbery. He had touched the one thing I held most sacred and desecrated it with his presence. It was a silent, venomous threat. It said, I can get to you anytime I want. Nowhere is safe. The fear was cold and sharp, but it was quickly consumed by a surge of pure, righteous anger. This was my home, Lena's home. He would not defile it. The final escalation came 2 days later. My phone rang and it was Detective Rossi. Her voice was urgent. Sam, are you at home? Yes, I said, my stomach tightening. What's wrong? I just got a call from hospital security at St. Mary's, she said. Her words clipped and professional. A nurse in the ICU reported a suspicious individual. A man matching your son's description tried to gain access to Walter Johnson's room. He told the nurse he was a close relative and needed to see him urgently. My God, I whispered. The nurse on duty was sharp. Rossi continued. She knew Walter's immediate family, and this man wasn't on the approved visitor list. When she challenged him and said she was going to call security, he became agitated and left quickly. We have units on their way to the hospital now, and I'm putting a guard on Mr. Johnson's door around the clock. The line went quiet for a moment before she spoke again, her voice grim. Sam, your son is not backing down. He's escalating. He knows the loose end is Walter. It seems he was trying to finish the job. I hung up the phone, the detective's words echoing in the terrifying silence of my living room. The photograph of Lena was still face down on the table. The threat was no longer just a psychological game. It was real. It was active. My son was not just a poisoner. He was a predator, and he was still hunting. The days following the attempt on Walter's life were a blur of fear and anger. I felt like I was living in a siege, my own home, a fortress against a threat that wore my son's face. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that slowed down on the street outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was a prisoner of Jamal's psychological war, and I knew I was running out of time. Detective Rossi was working the case, but she needed more than just a recording of a manipulative conversation. She needed something concrete, something that tied Jamal directly to the poison. I felt like I was at a dead end waiting for my son to make his next move. The breakthrough came on a gray, drizzly afternoon. My phone buzzed and I glanced at the screen. The number was blocked. Normally I would ignore it, but something compelled me to answer. I picked it up, my voice cautious. Hello? A woman's voice answered, so quiet and trembling it was barely a whisper. Sam. I didn't recognize it at first. Who is this? It's Simone, she whispered, and I could hear the sound of stifled sobs. Jamal's wife. I was stunned into silence. In all the years she had been married to my son, she had never once called me. I can't talk for long, she said, her words rushed. He thinks I'm at the grocery store. Can you meet me? Please, it's important. I'm so scared. Her fear was a tangible thing, a living entity that reached through the phone and gripped me. Where are you? I asked, my own voice low and urgent. She named a small, independent coffee shop on the other side of town, a place we would be unlikely to be seen. Half an hour, she said, and hung up before I could reply. The coffee shop was quiet, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and damp raincoats. I found a small booth in the far corner and waited, my mind racing. What could she possibly want? Was this some kind of trap orchestrated by Jamal? I almost left, but the genuine terror in her voice had convinced me to stay. She slipped into the booth a few minutes later, looking even more fragile and haunted than she had at her house. She was wearing sunglasses despite the gloomy weather, and her hands trembled as she clutched a large purse to her chest. She didn't order anything. She just sat there taking deep, shuddering breaths. Simone, I began gently. Are you okay? What's going on? Tears began to stream from behind her sunglasses. Okay, she whispered, a bitter, broken sound. I haven't been okay in years, Sam. I'm living with a monster. She finally took off the glasses, and I saw the dark, faded bruise on her cheekbone. My heart went cold. Did he do that to you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. He gets angry, she said, when things don't go his way. And since you were last at the house, he's been different. He's paranoid. He talks to himself. He knows you suspect him. He knows the police are watching. She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. Sam, you need to know. It's not just a passing interest for him. His hobby with plants and herbs. It's an obsession. He spends hours in his office reading old books about botany, about chemistry. He calls them his experiments. At first I thought it was harmless, but it got darker. He would order strange seeds online, grow plants in a locked greenhouse out back. I've seen him testing things on small animals. Her voice broke and she choked back a sob. He keeps a record of everything, she continued, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and conviction. He's arrogant. He thinks he's a genius. He has this little black notebook. He writes everything down in it. His formulas, his dosages, his plans. I know it's in there, Sam. The truth about what he did to Walter, the truth about what he planned to do to you. It's all in that book. Where is it? I asked, my own heart pounding now. Do you know where he keeps it? She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. No. He keeps it hidden. Probably in his office. It's always locked. I can't get in there. She took another shaky breath and reached into her purse. Her hand came out and she slid something small and cold across the table to me. It was a key. This is a spare key to his office, she whispered. He doesn't know I have it. It's the only one. Sam, I can't do it. I'm too afraid. If he ever found out, he would kill me. But you can. Please, you have to find that book. It's the only way to stop him. I stared at the small silver key resting on the dark wood of the table. It was the key to everything. To justice for Walter, to safety for myself, and to the damnation of my own son. I looked at Simone at the terror and the desperate hope in her eyes. She was a victim in this just as much as we were. I closed my hand around the key, its cold metal biting into my palm. Thank you, Simone, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. You are a very brave woman. She just shook her head, put her sunglasses back on, and slid out of the booth without another word. I watched her hurry out into the rain and disappear, a fleeting ghost who had just handed me the key to unlocking a nightmare. The small silver key felt both impossibly heavy and incredibly fragile in my hand. It was the physical manifestation of Simone's desperate gamble and my last best hope for justice. I called Detective Rossi and arranged to meet her immediately. We met in a generic interview room at the station, the air stale and heavy. I placed the key on the metal table between us. His wife gave this to me, I said, my voice low. She's terrified of him. She said he keeps a black notebook where he writes everything down, formulas, plans, everything. She says it's in his office and this is the only key he doesn't know about. Detective Rossi picked up the key, turning it over in her fingers. She looked at me, her sharp eyes searching my face. I saw the final piece of the puzzle click into place for her. The poison analysis, the recording of Jamal's manipulation, the attempted hospital visit, and now a terrified wife providing the means to find the physical proof. This was it. This was more than enough. This is the probable cause I need, Sam, she said, her voice firm with a new, unshakable confidence. I'm going to a judge right now. With this, I can get a warrant to search the entire property, his house, his office, everything. She stood up, her movements full of a sudden coiled energy. Go home, Sam. Stay by your phone. And whatever you do, do not go near that house. We will handle this now. The call came late the next afternoon. We're ready, Rossi said, her voice all business. The warrant is signed. We're moving in an hour. I know I told you to stay away, but I also know you won't be able to rest. Be at the end of his street. Park where you can see the house. Do not get out of your car. Just wait. I was there in 20 minutes, my old sedan parked under the shade of a large oak tree 200 yards from Jamal's front door. From here, I had a clear view of the house's cold glass facade. The waiting was the purest form of torture. Every minute that crawled by felt like an hour. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. What if Simone was wrong? What if Jamal had moved the book? What if they found nothing? Then I saw them. 2 unmarked police cars cruised silently down the street and parked in front of the house. Detective Rossi got out of the first car along with 3 other plainclothes officers. They walked up the long stone pathway, their movements calm, professional, and utterly menacing. Rossi rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened and Jamal stood there. Even from a distance, I could see the wave of arrogant indignation wash over him. He folded his arms, barring the doorway, his body language a wall of defiance. I saw his mouth moving, his head shaking. He was protesting, performing for the benefit of any watching neighbors. Rossi simply held up a piece of paper, the search warrant, and the officers moved past him into the house. The next hour was the longest of my life. I watched through the huge picture windows as shadows moved from room to room. It was a silent, surreal ballet of destruction. My destruction. I was watching the methodical dismantling of my son's life, a process I had started. A profound and terrible sadness washed over me. I saw Jamal pacing back and forth in the living room like a caged panther, his confident facade cracking under the strain. He ran his hands through his hair, his movements jerky and furious. I saw Simone huddled on a sleek modern sofa in the corner, looking small and broken, her face buried in her hands. My eyes were glued to the window of the room I knew was his office. I saw the beam of a flashlight cutting through the dim interior as an officer conducted a search. My entire being was focused on that single room. I found myself praying that they would find it, and praying that they wouldn't. I wanted justice for Walter, but the thought of seeing the cold, hard proof of my son's monstrous intentions filled me with a dread I could barely contain. Time stretched and warped. I had no idea how long I had been sitting there when I finally saw a change. An officer emerged from the office and approached Detective Rossi in the living room. He was holding something in his gloved hand. It was small. It was black. My breath hitched in my throat. Even from 200 yards away, I knew it was the notebook. The scene inside the house erupted. I saw Jamal lunge towards the officer, shouting his face a mask of pure rage and panic. 2 other officers immediately restrained him, forcing his arms behind his back. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the desperate, cornered fury of a trapped animal. I watched my heart a dead weight in my chest as they led my son out of his cold, beautiful house in handcuffs. My world had shrunk to the 4 corners of my car's windshield. Through the glass, I watched the scene unfold at a distance, a silent, terrible movie. I saw the officer emerge from the office holding the small black notebook. I saw Jamal's violent lunge, his face contorted in a mask of pure primal panic. I watched as they forced my son's arms behind his back, the click of the handcuffs seeming to echo across the manicured lawns. It was only when Detective Rossi's car pulled away with Jamal in the back seat that I finally took a breath. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was her. "Sam," she said, her voice steady but laced with a new grim tone. "It's over. We have him. And we have the proof." "The notebook?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. "Yes," she confirmed. "You have no idea, Sam. I've been a cop for 20 years. I've seen some dark things. This is something else entirely. I'm on my way back to the station. I want to read some of this to you now. You deserve to hear it." I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes, and listened as the voice of justice on the other end of the line began to narrate the anatomy of my own son's evil. The first several pages, she explained, were written with a chilling scientific detachment. It was like reading a graduate student's thesis. Jamal had documented his research into various toxic plants, but he had a clear fixation on Agaritina altissima, the plant commonly known as white snake root. He had detailed its chemical composition, its history, its toxicity levels. He wrote about the best methods for extracting the active poison, the alkaloid known as trematone. He had notes on its solubility in different liquids, its lack of taste or odor when mixed with alcohol. It was meticulous, it was methodical, and it was utterly devoid of any humanity. It gets worse. Sam Rossi's voice warned a grim preface to the next chapter of horrors. The notebook then transitioned from academic research to applied science. There were a series of dated entries detailing his experiments. He had started with lab rats he must have purchased. He recorded the dosages, injecting them into pieces of food. He noted the time it took for the tremors to start, for paralysis to set in, for the subjects to expire. His notes were clinical, describing their death throes with the detached curiosity of a botanist studying a wilted leaf. From there, he had moved on. There was an entry about a stray cat that had been hanging around their neighborhood. He had left out a saucer of milk for it. The entry was chillingly simple. Subject feline approx. 8 plalbs. Dosage 3 ml. Onset of symptoms 4 hours. Expiration 11 hours. Conclusion: effective but slower than anticipated. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the steering wheel to steady myself. The boy who had cried for a week when his pet goldfish died had grown into a man who could write about killing a cat with the emotional investment of someone writing a grocery list. But Detective Rossi was not finished. "Sam," she said, and I could hear the deep breath she took on the other end of the line. "The last 2 entries are the ones we're going to build our case on." He stopped using scientific labels. He started using initials. A cold dread, heavier and more absolute than anything I had felt before, settled over me. I knew what was coming. "The first entry is labeled Project WJ," she said, her voice hard as steel. "Walter Johnson. There are dates starting 2 months ago." He details his plan. "Objective test a non-lethal dosage to observe real-world effects and establish a baseline. Victim has a history of high blood pressure, making a cardiac event plausible." And then Sam, he wrote this: "Action: dispense 5 ml dose in a 200 ml solution of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Delivery mechanism: Birthday gift to primary target SH, with the high probability of it being passed on to WJ due to primary target's known abstinence. I made a choked, strangled sound. It wasn't an accident. Walter was not collateral damage. He was a guinea pig. My son had used my best friend, his own father-in-law, as a dress rehearsal for my murder. He had gambled on my love for Walter, on my generosity, and he had been right. The thought was so monstrous, so deeply twisted, that I felt my mind recoiling from it, trying to find some corner of denial to hide in. "There's one more entry," Sam Rossi said gently, her voice softening slightly, as if to brace me for the final blow. "It's labeled Project SH, my own initials. The entry is dated for the morning of my birthday," I whispered into the phone. "Yes," she confirmed. "It's laid out like a business plan. Target Samuel Hayes, occasion 70th birthday. Method gift delivery of contaminated whiskey, dosage 15 milliliters." He put that in bold, Sam. 15 milliliters. Triple the effective dosage from the WJ experiment to ensure fatality. He went on to calculate the probable timeline. Estimated time to death 6 to 8 hours. The symptoms will mimic a massive naturally occurring heart attack consistent with the subject's known medical history. And then at the bottom of the page, under a single underlined heading, he wrote the reason. I waited, my body rigid, my soul bracing for the final terrible word. The heading, Detective Rossi said, her voice filled with a cold fury, is motive. And beneath it is a single word, inheritance. That was it. That was all I was worth to him. My life, the love I had given him, the man I had tried to be, all of it was reduced to a dollar amount. A house, a bank account, an obstacle to be removed. The ice in my gut shattered, and for the first time since this nightmare began, a hot, cleansing wave of pure rage surged through me. What happened at the house? I asked, my voice shaking with this new terrible strength. When you found it, he completely fell apart, Rossi said. The moment he saw the book in our hands, the arrogant act dissolved. He started screaming that we had planted it, that it was a fake. Then he tried to lunge for it, to destroy it. He was frantic, a cornered animal. We had to restrain him. He's on his way to a holding cell now. And Simone, I asked quietly. She just collapsed. Rossi replied. She's with a victim support officer now. She just kept sobbing, repeating the words, "I'm sorry," over and over again. I ended the call, the silence in my car a deafening roar. I looked at the house down the street. It was just a house again. The police cars were gone. The drama was over. But inside my mind, a world had ended. The image of my son, the boy I loved, was gone forever, replaced by the cold, calculating script in that black notebook. He hadn't just tried to kill me. He had written out the entire story, a story where I was the victim, Walter was the experiment, and he was the victor. But he had made one mistake. He had let me live long enough to read the last page. The 6 months leading up to the trial were a slow, agonizing crawl. Walter gradually recovered his body, fighting its way back from the brink, but he was not the same man. He was weaker, more fragile, a shadow of the vibrant friend I had known my whole life. The legal process was a world of depositions, interviews, and endless waiting. But finally, the day arrived. I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to my wife's funeral, and drove to the courthouse, my heart a cold, heavy lump in my chest. The courtroom was a theater of hushed tension. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and anxiety. I sat with the prosecutor, a sharp, determined woman named Ms. Alvarez. Across the room, I saw Jamal for the first time since his arrest. He was thinner, paler, but he wore a perfectly tailored suit, a mask of calm indifference expertly arranged on his face. He sat beside his lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man named Peterson. Jamal met my gaze for a fleeting moment, and his eyes were not filled with remorse or fear. They were filled with a cold, reptilian hatred. In that moment, I knew that the son I had raised was well and truly gone. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. Ms. Alvarez led me through my testimony with a calm, methodical patience. I recounted the story from the beginning, the mysterious birthday gift, the strange phone call, Walter's collapse, the confirmation of the poison, and the chilling confrontation that I had recorded. The audio from that conversation was played for the jury, and I watched their faces as Jamal's smooth, manipulative voice filled the courtroom, suggesting that I was a confused, forgetful old man. Then it was Peterson's turn. He approached the stand with the confident swagger of a man who believed he could twist any truth. He started with a soft, patronizing tone. "Mr. Hayes," he began, "you've been through a lot, the loss of your wife, your subsequent health problems, your estrangement from your only son. It's understandable that you might be feeling emotional, isn't it? I am feeling a great many things, I said, my voice steady. Confused is not one of them. He smiled a thin, predatory expression. Your son Jamal is a very successful man, isn't he? A self-made man. He built a thriving business from the ground up while you were content with a simple life. Did that bother you, Mr. Hayes? Did you resent his success? I was proud of my son, I said. Were you? He pressed his voice, getting louder. Or were you jealous? Did you see his success as a judgment on your own life? Is it not true that your relationship became strained when his financial success began to far outstrip your own? He was painting a picture of me as a bitter, resentful father, a man capable of concocting a monstrous lie to ruin the son who had outshone him. He brought up my age, my heart condition, every detail Jamal had tried to use against me. He was trying to turn me into an unreliable narrator in my own life story. He paced before the jury, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned on his heel and faced me, his voice ringing with false sincerity. Mr. Hayes, let's be honest with this court. You were angry with your son. You felt abandoned by him. Isn't it true that you despise him? Tell the jury, Mr. Hayes, don't you in fact hate your own son? The courtroom was silent. The jurors stared at me, waiting. I felt the weight of every eye in that room. I took a deep breath, not looking at the lawyer, but looking directly at Jamal. His face was a mask of smug confidence. He thought he had me. I love the son I raised, I said, my voice clear and ringing with a truth that no lawyer could twist. I love the boy I taught to ride a bike and the young man I watched graduate from college. I will love that person until the day I die. I then turned my gaze to the jury. But I am here today because that man sitting over there tried to murder me. He poisoned my best friend as a test run. He is not the boy I raised. Those are two different people. A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. Peterson stood there momentarily speechless. He had no more questions. The most powerful testimony, however, came from Simone. She was escorted to the stand by a police officer, a frail, trembling figure who seemed to shrink under the weight of the courtroom's gaze. But when she began to speak, her voice, though quiet, was filled with a strength born of years of silent suffering. She told the jury about Jamal's secret life, his obsession with poisons, his chilling experiments. She spoke of his cruelty, his rages, and the climate of fear he had created in their home. Tears streamed down her face as she identified the black notebook, confirming that it was his handwriting, his notes, his creation. She was not just a witness, she was a survivor, and her testimony was a harrowing portrait of the monster she had been forced to live with. Finally, Ms. Alvarez presented her closing argument. She held up the black notebook for the jury to see. This is not just a book of notes, she declared, her voice resonating with conviction. This is the diary of a would-be murderer. A cold, calculated plan to kill a father for money to test a poison on an innocent friend. The evidence is not just compelling, it is absolute. It is written in the defendant's own arrogant hand. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and resolute. I held my breath, my hands gripping the edge of the bench in front of me. The foreman, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, stood and cleared her throat. She unfolded a piece of paper. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, she said, her voice clear and strong. How do you find the defendant, Jamal Hayes? She looked directly at Jamal. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A collective exhale swept through the room. Simone let out a strangled sob of pure, unadulterated relief. Across the room, Jamal's face crumpled. The mask of indifference shattered, replaced by a look of utter disbelief and rage. The sound of the judge's gavel was like a final nail being hammered into the coffin of the life my son had built and the family I had lost. It was not a moment of triumph. There was no joy, no victory. There was only the heavy, somber, and undeniable weight of justice finally being served. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. It was a formality, a final somber chapter in a story that had already been written. I was there, as was Walter, who sat beside me leaning heavily on a cane. Simone was there too, sitting on the other side of the aisle, a solitary figure in a sea of strangers. Jamal was led in wearing a drab prison jumpsuit, the expensive suit and arrogant demeanor replaced by a hollowed-out emptiness. He looked like a ghost, his eyes vacant and fixed on some distant point only he could see. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. The judge spoke, his voice a low, steady drone that filled the silent courtroom. He talked about the meticulous, cold-blooded nature of the crime, the premeditation, the profound breach of trust between a son and a father. He called Jamal's actions an affront to the very concept of family and humanity. When he delivered the sentence, his words were firm and absolute. For the crime of attempted murder in the first degree, this court sentences you, Jamal Hayes, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sound of the gavel falling was like a stone dropping into a deep, dark well. It was the final, irrevocable end. I watched as 2 guards came forward and led Jamal away. He didn't struggle. He didn't speak. He simply walked out of the courtroom and out of my life forever. I felt no satisfaction, no surge of victory, only a vast, aching emptiness where a son used to be. In the weeks that followed, life began to find a new, quieter rhythm. The reporters eventually stopped calling. The neighbors stopped staring with pitying eyes. The world moved on, and I had to learn to move with it. My first visit was to Walter. He was back in his own home now, cared for by his daughter Maria. He was thinner and his hands trembled slightly, a permanent reminder of the poison that had ravaged his body. But his eyes when he saw me were as kind and as clear as ever. I sat with him in his sunlit living room, and for a long time we didn't speak. There was nothing that needed to be said. He had been there. He understood. We were 2 old friends bound together by a shared trauma, a silent understanding that ran deeper than any words. He reached out and placed his trembling hand on my arm. "He's gone, Sam," he said, his voice soft but firm. "It's over." I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. We sat there for another hour, watching the dust motes dance in the sunbeams, the silence a comfortable blanket between us. Our friendship had survived the unthinkable, and in that quiet room I felt the first tentative flicker of something that might one day feel like peace. Later that evening I returned to my own quiet house. I walked out to the back porch and sat down on the old wooden swing, the one Lena and I had spent so many nights on. The chains creaked with a familiar, comforting rhythm. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut grass from a neighbor's yard. I looked out at the familiar shape of the trees against the twilight sky and thought about the word justice. I had gotten justice. The system had worked. A dangerous man was locked away where he could never hurt anyone again. My life was safe. Walter's life was safe. That was what justice provided. It was a wall, a shield, a locked door. It was an ending. But as I sat there, the swing moving gently back and forth, I understood with a painful clarity that justice and peace were not the same thing. Justice was a verdict handed down by a judge. Peace was a state of the soul, and mine was a war zone. Justice had given me safety, but it had not given me solace. It had not erased the memory of my son's voice twisting reality, nor the sight of his cold, hateful eyes in the courtroom. It had not brought back the boy I loved. It had only confirmed that he was truly and irrevocably gone. This victory was a terrible, hollow thing. It left behind not a sense of triumph, but a gaping wound where my family used to be. I realized then that the true sentence was not the one the judge gave to Jamal. It was the one I had to live with. The sentence of a father who had to help put his own son in a cage for the rest of his life. I looked up at the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I knew that my healing would not be a gift handed to me by a court of law. Peace wasn't something that would just arrive now that the storm was over. It was something I would have to build myself one quiet day at a time, one memory at a time. It would be the slow, painstaking work of learning to live with the ghosts, and for the first time learning to live for myself. The deepest betrayals often come hidden in familiar packages. Justice can close a chapter and lock a door, but true peace is a story you must learn to write for yourself, turning the pain of yesterday into the quiet strength needed for all of your tomorrows.